The Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. Visit marketingcollege.com to see our courses.
Hello and welcome to the Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. I'm your host, Kiran Kapoor, and coming up on the show tonight, we have a book review by marketing guru Peter Fisk, and my studio guest is a PR expert, Alison Thomas. But first, marketing is all about ideas, and many marketers dream about setting up their own businesses. Often they're worried about having their ideas stolen, or they've heard some scare stories about the expense and the complexity of registering trademarks and copyright. So here to talk about this important but often misunderstood area is Dave Hopkins of the Intellectual Property Office. Dave, welcome to the show. First of all, could we start with what is intellectual property?
It's a good question. Most people think about it in terms of just inventions and patents. But actually, intellectual property affects every business out there. It includes patents, which are for inventions, trademarks for names and slogans, registered designs for the look of a product, copyright, which is free, automatic, includes logos, websites, brochures. It can involve confidentiality agreements, trade secrets. So the famous Coca-Cola organization is, the product is based on a trade secret. And there are other things as well, but those are the main things that will really affect most of your listeners on a day-to-day basis.
So you're a member of the business outreach team. What exactly do they do?
Yeah, well, our task is to go out and really engage with SMEs to raise the importance of intellectual property rights. So we attend events, or we deliver workshops, one-to-ones, webinars, and so forth, anyway, in which we can promote our important message.
Let's go back a stage. You've explained what intellectual property is, but what extent is it actually an issue for business?
Okay, then, the quick way of explaining it probably is by either imagining or looking at a business card. On the business card, it's normally got the name of the business, which is usually incorporated as a limited company. Actually, that doesn't give you any IP protection. So potentially, a company that has been incorporated could be infringing somebody else's trademark. Another element on a business card would be the website address. As I said earlier, that's covered by copyright. And the rule on copyright is creator owns. So if somebody's created that website for you, potentially they do not own it, or you do not own it, unless there's been an assignment of copyright.
So does that mean that the agency that I use to design my own website, for example, who owns the design? Exactly,
and that's the question you should be able to answer me immediately. But the default position is creator will own, so it'll be the agency, not you. So any coding they've created, they will own. Anything that you've given them in terms of copy, text, etc., you will own. But potentially, when you come to sell that business or make any amends, that's when copyright usually comes back to haunt you. I was speaking to a gentleman the other week who had a software company, and it transpired he didn't own his name, he didn't own his website, he didn't own any of the software that he was selling because it had been created for him, and he didn't even own his own logo, which everyone's got on a business card, because that was created for him by a third party.
So how would you get round that? So in my case, an agency set up my website. Should I have made them assign something to me or sign something?
That's it. Normally, when you talk to anyone who creates anything for you, so whether it's a logo, software, photographs, they should, at the time of the contract, assign or agree to assign those rights over. Those are called economic rights. But if that isn't explicit in the contract, the normal default position is that they will retain ownership. So if you go to 3 companies, one of them may say no, one of them might say an extra £10,000, and one of them might say, well, actually, yeah, we'll do that free of charge, of course. So you can make an informed decision about how to go forward.
So you mentioned that the name of the business isn't necessarily owned by somebody. If the name of your business is yourself, so my business would be Kiran Kapoor, do I own that?
Potentially, you've got the right to use your own name in business. There are some stipulations, unless you change that by deed poll. So if you fancy changing your name to a famous female person, then that wouldn't count. But then you've got to be careful about passing off and so forth. And there have been a number of cases where people have used their own name but changed the look of the name to make it look like another company's name, even if it's their own name. So you've got to be really careful.
Can you give me an example of that one, David?
I think there's one where a guy called John Virgin was a plumber down in Cardiff. and he used his own name in business, and Virgin took an action against him. He said he was using his own name, but they produced a photograph of the side of his van, which was in a large red font. So he was asked to stop doing it on those basis. You have got enduring rights, but a trademark, which you can do yourself online or go through an intermediary like a trademark attorney, and that'll give you a monopoly across the UK. So if you were to do a trademark for Blue Tulip today, trademarks are split into 45 classes of goods. So it doesn't give you carte blanche right across the board, but it does in the areas you select. And it's quite a useful tool, especially if you're looking to expand.
So if I wanted to set up a business, and I'll use your example, Blue Tulip, I could register the name Blue Tulip, and there would be 45 different ways that I could register that.
The 45 different areas of trade, they're split into products and services, so that if you were selling clothes, it would be a different area to web design, etc. And there's a classification section which identifies those areas. You can phone us and ask, or if you go to an intermediary, they will sit there and say, these are the sort of classes you can have a look at. The registry is free to look at, so if you wanted to look up ASDA this afternoon, you just go onto our main site, online services, go onto trademarks, type in ASDA, and you'll see all the classifications that they're protected under. So there are free and easy ways of doing it. So my strong advice is that if a client walks in through the door and they want to launch a new product called Blue Tulip, that people embark trademark searches. We come across it really often where people have done Google searches, not good enough. They've looked on the company's house register, not good enough. You really need to check that out. And also, trademarks don't just cover the names, but also sound-alikes and look-alikes. So if you were trying to be clever and started trading under the name ASDA, AZDER, for instance, selling groceries, then ASDA, ASDA, would take an action against you and would probably be successful. Because if I said to you, ASDA, which one was I talking about? If you don't know the answer, that is called confusion. Therefore, they could be successfully taken an action against. And there's a number of large companies have been caught with this as well. You know, trademarks doesn't only cover names, it can cover slogans, shapes, colours. So, for instance, if you think of Toblerone, they've got the name Toblerone protected, but they've also got the tubular triangular shape protected as well in the area of confectionery. So that they're the only people who can sell tubular triangular bars of chocolate, which would be quite handy if a marketeer thought of coming up with a tubular triangular bar of chocolate and calling it something else, as somebody tried to do, and they called it the Alpine bar. And there was litigation involved in that. And it's quite serious, and very serious, in fact. It means that all the shelves are stripped of those products, compensation and public apologies. So for a new business startup, it can have horrendous implications.
We'll put the details of your website and where to go for the trademark search on the Star Radio website. Where do businesses go for advice?
Okay, well, there's a number of sources. First of all, I would suggest the IPO website, ipo.gov.uk, which is a great place to start. We've developed a set of online tools, one called the Health Check, where you can do a starting point, which is an audit. So you can see what copyright you own and don't own, go through that process. If marketeers want to skill themselves up, and I think it's an essential part of it, we've developed an online tool called IP Equip, which is purposed aimed at intermediaries, business advisors and so forth. It takes about an hour and a half to do the course. It can be done in 20-minute tranches, etc. So that's a really good way forward. If marketing companies are looking at building up local relationships, then possibly talking to a trademark attorney within the locale would be a good way forward. And there's an organisation called ITMA, the Institute of Trademark Attorneys, will provide local attorneys in the geographical area that they're located. So potentially that's something that you may want to think about doing as a marketing person.
So Dave, if there was one thing you wanted to get across to the listeners, what would it be?
I would suggest by starting off by answering the question, what IP do I own? So as a marketing company, an agency, have a look at what you do. If you're creating for other people, do you own it? Have you assigned it? And if you're talking to clients, ask them that question. What IP do you own? If they're offering you photographs, logos, images to work with, have they got the rights to use them, change them, amend them, etc.? So that's a good starting point. And just visit the IPO website for much more information.
Dave, thank you so much. That was really fascinating. And I should say that the Intellectual Property Office runs events which you can find on their website, ipo.gov.uk.
The Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. Enhance your career with Cambridge Marketing Colleges.
And now it's the time in the show to have our book review. On our very first show, Peter Fisk, a marketing guru, came on to talk about his forthcoming book, Game Changers. And before he left, I asked Peter to review 3 books for me. These are books that have interested him.
The Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. Visit marketingcollege.com to see our courses.
Your first book, Peter, was Insanely Simple, The Obsession That Drives Apple's Success by Ken Siegel. What was it that intrigued you about that?
I guess, firstly, it was the guy, Ken Siegel. Ken was the advertising agency person who worked very closely with Steve Jobs and was part of Steve Jobs' inner team, if you like, through the days when he came back to Apple, when he launched the iMac, the iPod, and the iPad. He was actually the man who came up with the I in all of those names, and he tells a great story in terms of how Steve Jobs wanted to call the iMac the Mac Man, but Ken was adamant that it had to be something a bit more different and a bit more stylish, and this word I, which in many ways stands for individual or intimate or interactive and lots of other things too, was a much simpler way which could be then conveyed across the different products as a portfolio of time emerges. And so what Ken did was really to focus in on the essence of what he believed what made Apple great, and that was simplicity. The idea of how do you take complexity in the world and how do you, through a lot of effort and a lot of thinking, how can you make it simpler? So in Insanely Simple, Ken Siegel tells the story of Apple. He tells the story of how he worked with Steve Jobs and the tension, if you like, between somebody who was incredibly strong-minded and determined for things to be a certain way, and then a great creative team around him who actually came up with ways of making that vision happen.
And your second book was Business Model Generation by Alex Osterwalder.
So Business Model Generation was the best-selling book across America over the last 12 months. And it really takes thought, which has been emerging for quite some time, in terms of how does a business work together? And how can you innovate not just the product within the business or even the product and service, but how do you innovate every aspect of business? So you innovate, for example, your choice of customers, you innovate the channels to market, you innovate the product and service experience, you innovate the purpose and the proposition, you innovate the supply chain, you innovate the business model in terms of the revenue behind it, and then you innovate the costs and the revenues which come together and how you make money. And he created, if you like, something incredibly simple, which is called the Business Model Canvas, on one page. And this is one page, and it's got about 10 boxes. And each of those 10 boxes, you can get your post-it notes out and think about, how can I create different configurations of business ideas? So if I had a different customer, what channel would get to those customers? And then what products and services would support those customers through those channels? How can I generate revenue? Would I charge the customer, or would I generate revenue by working with somebody else? Which partners might I use? And what are the aspects of the supply chain, and what are the costs and risks and resources and assets within my organization would I use? And so by bringing each of those different components together and having, if you like, a post-it note for each one of those different components, you can create a configuration for a business. And Alex's book is fantastic in giving you a very practical template from which you can create an infinite number of different ways in which your business could work.
And when you came on the show last time, you were talking about collaborative consumers, and I'm guessing that's what's behind the thinking of your last book, which was What's Yours is Mine by Rachel Botsman.
That's right, and Rachel is passionate about, and going all around the world spreading a gospel about, is how people can share more. And sharing is good both in the sense of consumers love to share things. It's more human, it's more sociable, it's more fun. But it's also good for the world. So we make less things if we share things. And so less products being made and being able to utilize them more often. And if you look at the car industry, going back 7 years, Robin Chase created a fantastic company called Zipcar. And this is about being able to rent a car, not per week as Hertz and Avis used to offer at the airports, but be able to rent a car from somewhere just probably parked down the road from you by looking on your mobile phone, with GPS being able to locate that car, joining a club through subscription, a Zipcar club, which then gives you access to the cars whenever you need them, and then paying a small amount per kilometre and per minute for which you use that car. And that often worked out much cheaper than a taxi if you were travelling across the city, but it also certainly worked out much cheaper than owning cars, which depreciate by thousands of pounds or dollars per year. So Zipcar is a great example of collaborative consumption. Robin's gone on from there, and she's now created Buzzcar, which says, I'm travelling on a certain route to a certain place at a certain time. I've got a spare seat. Do you want to come and join me? So that's another form of collaboration. And then, in every sector, in every type of thing which you have, thinking about how can you share things, or how can you borrow things, or how can you rent things, as opposed to how do you have to own each of the things. So a great inspiring thought, if you like, from Rachel, but also a great business model whereby we could all make a little bit more money out of the things which we own.
Thank you, Peter. And if you miss Peter on our first show, you can listen to the podcast at the Star Radio website at star107.co.uk.
The Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. Enhance your career with Cambridge Marketing Colleges.
My studio guest is Alison Thomas, owner of CAT, a PR consultancy, and you specialise in music and entertainment.
Hi there, Kieran. Yes, I absolutely do. I do now, over the course of my career, which has spanned something like, I'm not going to confess that actually, quite a few years. I've worked in very many different sectors. So I've worked in financial services, I've worked in construction, I've worked in retail, travel, international, all sorts of different sectors. And now I specialise in arts, music and entertainment predominantly.
Fantastic. We'll come on to a bit more of that in a moment. But I just want to start with some basics. So can we actually go through what PR is and how it fits in with marketing?
Oh, PR is so important. It's actually, most people think of it as the glamorous side of stuff. You've seen the ab-fab, or Bolly and all that kind of stuff. It's not like that. Like all the marketing disciplines, it's a serious business. And really what you need to think about from a business perspective is that it's about managing reputation. It's about things that people say about you, things that you do that people then think about you, and it's looking at a long-term point of view rather than just a short, sharp campaign that you may find with marketing. It's a long, sustained effort. So it affects every single business. It affects every single person, right down to a celebrity, individual, small business, large business, corporate, absolutely everybody. And therefore, it's really important as part of the marketing mix.
Excellent. So how did you get started in PR?
Well, PR has always been my first love. I have been working in marketing and PR for, as I said, many years, and so I've actually got a very broad range of marketing experience as well as PR. But I first fell in love with PR when I was a teenager, and I was actually invited to go to a Coca-Cola sponsored event that was actually run by, the PR was being run by my dad's agency at the time. And I actually fell in love with the whole thing then because I was going around speaking to all these journalists. I was talking about events. I was meeting famous people at that stage who were all athletes. And it was an exciting time, and it just made me think, I'd love to do this as a career myself. And I started, first of all, in marketing. I went around through the corporate route, through to marketing and sales promotion, direct marketing, all the different elements that you'd expect, and then finally found my way into PR, which has always been my first love, and now I wouldn't really move away.
And you've obviously set up CAT. How did you come into setting up your own agency?
Well, I've always wanted to do something on my own. I think when you're actually involved in the disciplines of marketing, you're a creative kind of person anyway. You have to have an innovation sort of driving you through your life. I was working at the time with a corporate. I've had a very good career. I've had very, very many different roles in senior positions in corporate companies. But I always wanted to actually set up my own agency because I felt that would give me the ability to drive my career in the direction that I wanted to and allow me to work with very many different types of clients. I think this client side can be a little bit restrictive. I think anybody who works in marketing would probably agree that it's nice to know a business inside out and go in every day and know what you're dealing dealing with, but you don't quite have the same thrill of learning about something new. And I've got a thirst for knowledge that I'm always trying to quench, or whatever that may be. And that kind of drove me to actually setting up my own agency, so I could work with many, many different kinds of people in different industries and have a challenge every day that I felt that I could sort of solve.
And what sort of things do you actually do?
Well, the lovely thing about PR is it spans so many different disciplines. With PR, okay, you've got the reputational side of things, but physically managing that on a day-to-day basis for a business or a client is all about looking at the different activities that you would do. So you've got anything from events, you've got corporate social responsibility. Essentially, the mainstay of it all is about media relations, which takes me right back to that first conversation we had there about when I was young dealing with the journalists. So there's a lot about media relations. And more importantly, nowadays, we're now moving into a world of online PR. So it's moving from an offline arena into an online arena. So we've got all the social media, we've got websites, we've got blogs, we've got forums, we've got a whole host of new different tools that have really made it so much more exciting than it probably ever used to be. And building it all up into a mix that, when you get the mix right, really has a massive effect on a business, and that's an exciting prospect.
Could you perhaps talk us through some of the people that you actually work with?
Well, now I work, as I said, Kieran, predominantly in the music and arts and entertainment industry. It actually is one of the I suppose, the most exciting areas to work in. I think it could be considered almost like a bit of a dream job. I think if you're in PR, that's the area that you'd love to be in. So I actually work with a number of clients. I've got a photography client who's a rock photographer, Nick Elliott, who's one of the best in the world, which is a very exciting situation to be in, because we get to go to see lots of various different gigs, events, famous people. He travels with various different bands and artists, so I manage his PR on both online and offline, so lots of exposure there. I work with a band called Marmalade, who are 60s sensational pop makers. They're Scottish hit makers, so they're called. So I do a lot of their social media activity as well. On the other side of things, outside of the music element, I work in the arts as well with a company called Red Label Publishing, and they publish art and books for the music and arts industry. So that's all fine art, and a lot of the fine art photography that Nick Elliott does, for example, ends up in books, and I work with them. And another client I have is Deep Red magazine, which is an online music and arts magazine which launched last year, and I'm actually senior editor of that magazine as well. So I see the flip side of things, the PR on one side and the journalism on the other side, which is a great combination.
So you mentioned that you did the social media side for Marmalade, and I think also for Nick Elliott. So how does that work in the PR terms?
Oh, it's so important these days. You can't get away without it. It's quite an interesting thing that I've been doing with Marmalade, for example, who never had any PR or social media activity in an online capacity. So when I was working with them, I first got involved with working with them on a project that they were doing last year, and they were actually producing an album, an actual vinyl album, so going back to the old school, because there's a bit of a resurgence in that, which was a lovely story in its own right. But at that time I said, this is great because it's it's going foot in the past, but actually what about the foot in the present? And we started to talk about social media, and so it was about really looking at things from the way of actually getting to the fans in a quick, easy and exciting manner. So we've set up Twitter and we've set up Facebook, we're looking at Google, and we haven't quite got this far yet, but I think it's also very important to have something like a blog or some sort of newsroom that you can actually go out in an online capacity and talk about what somebody's doing. So as an example of that, Nick Elliott, for example, has a newsroom where we are constantly putting up stories about what he's involved in, and in both of those examples you've got a fan base of people who know where to go, get the information that they want, and consume that media and that information when they want to. So social media is very, very important. Twitter is great from a business perspective for small businesses. It's far harder media to use for a band, for example, because the fans may not be able to engage in quite as much depth as they want to. But it's great from the point of view of maintaining a relationship. Facebook, on the other hand, is good because it allows a little bit more opportunity for people to have far more in-depth conversation. But either way, they've got that connection, and that's what's important. So it's about a broadcast tool, but also engagement. And it's only when you start to engage with people that actually start to build a relationship, and then people feel that they're getting something back from that investment that they're making in terms of time or purchasing your product.
Because I believe that Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber have some of the largest numbers of Twitter followers.
Yes, absolutely. And you'd expect that, wouldn't you? Because, of course, the mass media are able to actually expose artists of that nature in a way that no other media can do. But social media allows them to interact with their fans. And I think we've got to remember, bringing ourselves back to PR, that actually it is an incredibly useful tool from the point of sending out messages, but also managing that reputation again. Well, the downside of it is that you can very easily forget that you're talking to a mass audience on there. So if you have, for example, like Lady Gaga, millions and millions of followers, you're talking in terms of mass media suddenly to people who are interested in listening to you. So one thing that you say is going to be quickly broadcast to those people, but if you say something wrong, that's going to be quickly broadcast as well. And lots of people fall foul of that and don't quite appreciate the fact that they are talking to masses because they can't see them. We're sitting there on our phones in our own isolated place, sometimes with a glass of wine, and you can imagine them at after-show parties tweeting away, and they say something, just being themselves, and don't realise that it's damaging reputation. So that would be the bit I would definitely say to business, to think about how they actually operate when they're in that environment.
And what would your advice be? To use an agency to stop that happening, or to make certain that you're always with your business hat on, as you put it?
I think if you're doing it yourself, which you could say that a lot of celebrities like to do, you have to always have that business hat on. I'd like to think that I try and imagine all those hundreds of people. I've got something like 950 followers myself, and I am trying to imagine 950 people standing in front of me. And if I could actually put something out or say something to them that I'm happy for all 950 to hear, then that's what I'd say on social network. So if you're doing it yourself, I would say put that kind of mentality on before you put your finger on that iPhone. From a business perspective, it's a little bit more complex because you're now having to think about tone of voice. You have to think about what you're actually saying in terms of messaging for the business. It's not simply about saying, oh, I've had a cup of tea, here's my glass of wine. It's now about what corporate messages do you want to convey. When we get into that arena, it's not quite as simple, and I wouldn't say that just to try and undertake that activity yourself. I would advise to really get somebody who is an expert in social media and PR to manage that on your behalf, simply because it's so easy to fall foul of saying something you shouldn't, but also it sounds like it's an easy thing to do because you're just putting out messages. But they have to, as with all campaigns, be planned, they have to be thought through, they have to be delivered at the right time, and that's not always easy, just you doing that in an office environment. And to have somebody who's specialist in it to do it for you is a far better result for you.
Alison, thank you so much for coming on. That really was fascinating.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been great.
The Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. Visit marketingcollege.com to see our courses.
Many thanks to Alison for coming in. And that's it for the Marketing Show this time. If you'd like any more information, or you'd like to listen to the show again, then head over to star107.co.uk, where you can do just that. I've been your host, Kiran Kapoor. Many thanks for listening, and I'll catch you again in 2 weeks' time.
The Marketing Review with Cambridge Marketing Colleges. Enhance your career with Cambridge Marketing Colleges.